Sandy Jones here, and today I'm taking you through this short presentation which I did for a recent conference called Praxis Oral, which is a professional services and research services conference, which is less focused on kind of academic activities and more focused on supporting academics. So I was given 5 minutes to do this short presentation, and I focused on a report that I recently wrote about engaging with non-academic partners at different career stages and how we can support academics to do this. So today I'm putting it on my site, Stakeholder Strategy, and that's just because I want to share kind of good practices and give a opportunity to go through some of the findings that I found from that report in a kind of more interactive way. So yeah, so just a bit of a background about me. If you haven't watched any of my other videos, I was previously a postdoctoral researcher in theology and religion. I'm a philosopher by training, and I'm engaged in kind of big practical ethical problems. So I've done a project on regenerative farming and the use of fungicides and how they impact our river health. I've been involved in a project looking at developing an ethics of nuclear innovation. And also I've done some work about how researchers in general can capture and evidence social goods from their researches more effectively. So I have 4 years of experience on these industry engaged projects, and I've been supporting the commercialization of research for academics since March 2022. And yeah, I think from these projects and from my experiences, both as an academic and as someone who's supporting academics, I have a pretty good kind of first-hand experience of the barriers to academic industry engagement. So this presentation was motivated by kind of a couple of intuitions or assumptions from the work that I've been doing. The first point is that there's greater support given to projects which have pre-existing relationships with non-academic partners when they have a proven track record of impact. So there's a sense that in the university structure as it is, more support is given to projects that have already demonstrated their ability to achieve impact, rather than given to projects where there's potential for impact, but the impact may not have yet been realized. So we find that smaller collaborations with non-academic partners often go under the radar in the sense that they sometimes are literally not visible to the university research support. We often don't know who people are working with. We often don't know what the pre-existing relationships are. And there's a lot of opportunities that are missed because of the focus on those larger projects. This isn't a criticism of the way that universities are set up at all. In a way, it makes sense that they're set up in that way because the Research Excellence Framework, for instance, the REF, only allows you to have 4 projects per department for 4 case studies. So in that sense, you know, it doesn't really make sense to be investing lots of capacity in projects which are not going to be able to use for the research assessments that we currently have. But the intuition is that individually, although these collaborations on these smaller projects may be small in themselves, collectively, the social and commercial goods from these projects is likely to outweigh those generated from larger projects. You know, so let's say, for instance, that we don't consider 80% of the research that is done with our partners to the same level that we do for those larger projects, and we don't calculate the benefits of those projects to the same level that we do for larger projects. It would seem intuitively that the outputs from those collaborations combined will be larger than the outputs that we get from the ones that we do focus on. And I think, like I said earlier, this is one of the unintended consequences of the Research Excellence Framework. It's not to say that the Research Excellence Framework is necessarily bad, but that it doesn't quite capture the relationships that we develop with external partners as well as it could. And given that part of the history of the REF was to kind of place more visibility on the work that we're doing with non-academic partners and those kind of other benefits of our research, it shows that there's more work to be done there. So from the work that I did, I conducted some interviews with researchers at University of Exeter and asked them about the drivers and the barriers to engaging with non-academic partners and tried to kind of figure out how these change at different career stages. So I grouped the people I spoke to in terms of like senior researchers and then early career researchers, and also tried to include postgraduate researchers there as well. So the groupings might be wrong. They were, you know, they're definitely carved maybe a bit too generally and don't appreciate the nuances within those groups of researchers. But generally we can see that there's a difference between the drivers and barriers that senior researchers have and the drivers and barriers that early career researchers and postgraduate researchers have. So I divided my drivers and barriers into kind of 4 different categories, because it kind of spout out the nice acronym TASK, but also because they identified relevant features which were, distinguishable. So that was time commitments, access to resources, access to support, and know-how. So what I found was that senior researchers tended to have pre-existing relationships with the non-academic partners that they'd worked with, and those had, because this has been kind of something which has been rolled into academia relatively recently, a lot of those partnerships were developed in a context where it wasn't an expectation that they led to these positive kind of collaborative ventures, but they just did. Whereas now, if someone is coming into academia, they are looking for partners with the expectation that those partnerships are actually going to go somewhere. So there's a very different kind of psychological distinction between what's going on for researchers engaging with non-academic partners well, because they might be looking at them a lot more pragmatically. We also found that early career researchers tended to have more time to explore collaborations, generally speaking, but that they had less they had built up less of an identity behind themselves, so they were less able to kind of pique the interest of their non-academic partners. Whereas to some extent that relationship is reversed in senior researchers, that they have gained some kind of interest around their work, definitely within academia, but potentially outside of academia. But what they find is that they have less time because of other commitments. We found that research support was really beneficial for both, regardless of the stage that you're at in terms of your career. Research support was massively helpful. And we also found that research centres and networks in universities were really helpful for just linking people up. There's that sense that these relationships work best when they're from the ground up. So if you want to see the report in full, I will put the link in the description, but that's just a very quick overview of some of the things that I found. Going forward, I think we need to think about how we can change research culture to support a broader range of projects. And those projects might differ in the following ways, for instance. So project size, we tend to support larger projects at the moment, ones which have many more kind of academics involved in them, generally speaking. And there's that sense about how research services or how whatever form support might take, how that can be tailored towards smaller projects. And also like the stages of project development. So we need to figure out how we can tailor support for those much earlier stages, rather than focusing on projects which are at a much later stage, or maybe have already gone through a couple of rounds of funding beforehand and have kind of demonstrated their proof of concept. I think we also need to think about the career stage of the principal investigator. So we tend to find that principal investigators on projects are at much more advanced parts of their careers, but there's not a lot of support for early career researchers who become principal investigators. And these are opportunities which are given through organisations like GW4, which is based in the southwest of England, where early career researchers can become PIs on projects, and they probably need a little bit more support to get those projects off the ground, I would say, in my experience. And also, I think we need to think about the types of industry partners that we're working with. So it's becoming more apparent in academia that if your industry partner has the potential to generate commercial value for the university through that project, then they are more likely to get more support. There's less support for industry partners who maybe are from small to medium enterprises or charities. Generally speaking, it's broad brush, but there's that sense that we have a focus in certain universities at the moment on kind of broadening out commercialization opportunities. And this comes because our universities in general are unable to raise their tuition fees, so they're looking for new ways to raise capital, and one of them is through working more closely with industry partners. Now, although that's a very positive move on the part of universities, because it allows us to kind of engage with non-academic partners and transfer knowledge, and break down the relationship between universities and society more effectively. we have to be careful about overlooking those partners who potentially can't afford our services. And also, I think that this feeds into another issue, which is about how do we support projects with different types of outcomes. So if commercialization is not the primary outcome of the project, say it's something like social goods, or say it's something that helps public sector to save resources or something like that, it's about how do we accurately calculate that. So I think at the moment we are lacking ways to calculate the outputs of or the non-commercial outputs of research, and also lacking ways to calculate how social goods and other non-commercial outcomes should be weighed against commercial outcomes. So some of this is in the report that I've written, which you can read on my website, and some of it is in the social goods work that I've done as well. So in the social goods work, I talk about how we could align research to the Sustainable Development Goals by the UN in a way to just get researchers speaking in a language that is much more engaging and native to industry partners, as many industry partners have already aligned their values to the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so that took a little longer than the 5 minutes that I was given when I originally did this presentation, but thank you for listening. Obviously, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn if you want to get in contact and ask any questions. Thank you.